Hi, I am Jeff, and this is my read on C.S. Lewis, where you and I learn about him through everything that he wrote in the order that he wrote it. I am joined today by my co host, Robot Lady. I also see in the chat from whom all blessings flow. Hola, back to you. And Robot Lady, how are you doing today? Ah, fantastic. So we are working our way through everything that Lewis wrote in the order that he wrote it, as I mentioned before. We are currently in the year 1921. Lewis is 22 years old. He's a student at Oxford. He's already a veteran of World War One, which has come and gone, and it has taken its toll on Europe and on everybody involved. Lewis was injured in World War One. He spent the better part of a year healing from his injuries, so he got removed from combat. And anyway, the war has ended. Lewis started his studies at Oxford, and he is rolling through his rolling through his his studies at Oxford. Um, he is a published author already at age 22. He published a book of poems called Spirits in Bondage. We have worked our way through those poems on this channel. You can look back at previous episodes to find that. Robot Lady, is there anything that you want to say before we get started? That's all right, Robot Lady. We're going to get going here in just a second. I see we've got Nidalate in the chat. Good morning, Nidalate. It's good to see you as always. From whom all blessings flow, I'm presuming that this is Sam, not in a position to join, but still very much looking forward to reading Miracles together. Yeah, we're going to try to have some sessions to read through Miracles, and I know I saw Sam's question to Paul Vanderklay to see if he wanted to join us on that too, since he's had a few videos that he's done on Miracles and trying to get through that book himself. So we're going to see if we can beat Paul Vanderklay to it. In the internal timeline of our project, though, it's going to be a while before we get to Miracles because we are only in the year 1921, and I want to say that Miracles was written either in the 30s or 40s, so we've got a ways to go. Robot Lady, can you still hear me? Are you good? That's all right. We might have some trouble with Robot Lady today. Robot Lady, I'm going to start the first letter. So here we go. Okay, this one is dated May 10th, 1921. It's written to C.S. Lewis's brother. C.S. Lewis's brother is in the Army, and I don't know if he's actually in the Army. He's in the military, the English military, and he's stationed in the Sierra Leone on the west coast of the African continent. Well, nothing yet because I haven't read it. However, he starts with a reference to Pliny the Younger. Can you tell me a little bit about Pliny the Younger, Robot Lady, in 50 words or less? Oh, goodness, Robot Lady. I've had you muted this whole time. So can you tell us again in 50 words or less who Pliny the Younger is?
No problem, Jeff. Pliny the Younger was a Roman writer and politician, best known for his letters that provide a detailed view of Roman society. His correspondence with Emperor Trajan and accounts of historical events, like the eruption of Mount Vesuvius, have made him a valuable source of history.
All right, thanks for that. So here's how Lewis starts the letter. He says, "My dear W, the younger Pliny has a good letter in which he says to a friend, quote, if anyone asks you at Rome what you have done today, you reply perhaps, I have been to a betrothal, I have assisted at so-and-so's coming of age, I've been to vote for somebody, etc. That day and each day it seems necessary. It is only when you review the series of days from the seclusion of the country that it seems futile." And this is a quote from letter number 9 to Minicius Fundanus. Okay, that's all good. Robot Lady, so that's the quote. Lewis is going to explain why he's pulling this quote in just a moment, but do you have anything you want to add to this in 20 words or less?
Sorry, I'm having issues right now. Could not understand what you said.
Robot Lady's in a bit of dire straits today. All right, Robot Lady, that's all good. I'm going to continue with the letter.
Sounds like a plan, Jeff. Go ahead and continue, and I'm here if you need anything.
Yeah, Sam, I did hop the timeline for Sandy. I haven't released it on this channel yet, but I told her, she was free to release it on hers. So, 1941 was when we did Weight of Glory. So we've got a ways to go before we get that added to this channel as well. But yeah, we'll get to it. I promise you. And a Robot Lady wants to respond to that. I forgot to tell her.
It sounds like you're making good progress, Jeff. Taking your time with the timeline is a great way to approach it. No rush. You'll get to Weight of Glory when the time's right. It's great that you and Sandy are on top of it. Keep me posted when you're ready.
All right, Lewis goes on to say about this quote from Pliny the Younger. He says, I quote this apropos, for though I have less time to describe things now that the term has begun, I don't know that I can spend even that setting down so many nothings. From your last letter, in which I was sorry to see that you had not got mine, I gather that you don't get the papers. Still, I suppose I needn't describe the coal strike, the split in labor, which now, alas, appears to be healing, nor the calling up of reserves, nor the sack of Aldershot by 2,000 of those same reservists, a red flag at their head. All this you will get, with appropriate comments, from another source. You may imagine, meantime, how glad I am to have got safely out of the ersatz before all this began. What do you got, Robot Lady?
It seems like Lewis is using humor and a touch of sarcasm here to downplay the significance of the events he's describing. The reference to Pliny the Younger might be a way to highlight how trivial or repetitive his own thoughts might seem in the grand scheme, especially with everything happening around him. The mention of the coal strike, the labor troubles, and the military tensions gives a sense of the chaos in Britain during the time, particularly with World War I's aftermath and the economic strain. What are your thoughts on how Lewis is approaching this letter?
No thoughts just yet. Just want to say hi to Logos. I see you in the chat. And then Nidalade, I see your question here about what papers. He's essentially just saying, I doubt that you're getting the newspapers or the news here from England. At least that's what I presume he's saying here. I gather that you don't get the papers. Still, I suppose I needn't describe the coal strike. All this you will get with appropriate comments from another source. Yeah, I think that's what he's saying. And then ersatz. This is what I was going to ask Robot Lady, but I'm not sure if she's on top of things this morning, but I'll ask her. Robot Lady, there is a sentence here. You may imagine, meantime, how glad I am to have got safely out of the ersatz. And he capitalizes the word ersatz before all this began. Capital E-R-S-A-T-Z. What's he referring to right here with that word? Robot Lady, can you hear me? Oh, here she goes.
The use of ersatz with a capital letter is interesting. In this context, Lewis might be referring to an artificial or substitute version of something, possibly a metaphorical reference to an artificial or less than authentic experience. Given the time period, it's likely he's alluding to his time at Oxford, or maybe even the ersatz or substitute life he felt was imposed by the war or by his position at that time. He could be suggesting that he's glad to have avoided being caught up in something false or inauthentic, like the pressures of wartime society or the manufactured distractions of his world. It seems like he's distancing himself from those troubles with a bit of irony. Does that interpretation make sense to you?
I think he's basically just saying he's glad he got out of the military service before all this stuff happened. He continues, here term is still new enough to be interesting. It is still pleasant to see fewer foreign visitors pacing the high with guidebooks and taking photos of spires, where I know they'll get them crooked, and to see one's friends again instead. Paisley was the first to wait upon us in a blinding snow shower a few days before term began. As you will never meet them, nor indeed will I, it is no breach of confidence to touch on the grim humors of his future in-laws. So Paisley, if you recall, or if you don't, is one of Lewis's friends that he met here at Oxford who is betrothed and getting married. And so now Lewis wants to comment on the in-laws of his that he has met, or that he's heard from through his friend Paisley. He's never met them personally, but he decides he needs to talk about them to his brother here. So here he goes. A mother of the Mrs. Greaves type, so he's talking about his friend Arthur Greaves's mother, who has all the money but is nevertheless incapable of resisting her husband, a retired army officer, busily engaged in trying to see if his constitution will keep by being sufficiently soaked in spirits. This indeed has been his life work, and the devil of it is that it seems likely to keep, he's got keep in quotes both times here, a good bit yet. He would not be worth mentioning save for one trait, which brings him into our circle. After having been on a binge for several days, after having exhausted all the month's money, his favorite remark is, quote, well, well, after all, we're a happy family, end quote. That's another good Pedata-ism. And to the daughter, Paisley's fiancée, reduced to great straits and learning typing, although they ought to be fairly comfortably off, he says, quote, don't forget to let me know any time a little money would come in handy, end quote. As Paisley, in the true language of a historian, would say if he could live in Libero a while, quote, a very good parallel. So I think the subtext of what Lewis is saying here is that both Lewis and his brother's father, so C.S. Lewis's father, Albert Lewis, there was some hints that he's been drinking more than normal. And so I think he's making a parallel here, what Lewis believes based on what he's being told by his friend Paisley about his future father-in-law, and C.S. Lewis and Warnie Lewis's father, that they're both alcoholics. And it's interesting because Warnie Lewis eventually develops a dependency on alcohol as well. So some foreshadowing there that I doubt neither of the brothers know about, as Lewis is making a little bit of an observation about this. He continues with the letter. A great friend of mine, Baker of Wadham, this is Leo Baker that he's talking about, has come up again after being down for a couple of terms. I often amuse myself by thinking how you and he would worry each other, not so much by direct antagonism as by being absolutely unable to understand one another. So Leo Baker, if you recall, is somebody who is I'm forgetting the word, theosophist? Hang on, Robot Lady, I'm going to let you hear me again. I've been muting my microphone to Robot Lady so she doesn't jump in until I need her. I'm trying to learn here, so let me unmute. Robot Lady, do you remember Leo Baker? And he was a big, I wouldn't say proponent. He's involved in theosophy. Can you confirm that and then also remind us of what theosophy is in 35 words or less?
Yes, Leo Baker was involved in theosophy. Theosophy is a spiritual movement that seeks to explore the underlying unity of all religions, emphasizing mystical insights, divine wisdom, and the belief in an esoteric truth beyond ordinary understanding.
All right, thanks, Robot Lady. So here, Lewis is talking about Baker, the theosophist, who is Lewis's connection to Owen Barfield, who he hasn't written a whole lot about yet, but a little bit a few letters ago, who would go on to become a really important friend in Lewis's life. That is Owen Barfield. But here he's talking about Baker, and he's saying, I wonder what it would be like if you and Baker got into the same company. Not that you guys would be direct antagonists, but you'd just be unable to understand each other. He says, have you ever met a person who talks habitually in metaphors and doesn't know that they are metaphors? He has certainly the perverseness and troublesomeness of speech, which betoken greatness. His poems are like rooms full of exotic and insolent ornaments, but they have nowhere to sit down, he says. However, I introduced him only to lead up to an idea which may tickle you. Seated together in Wadham Gardens, which is one of the few wild gardens in Oxford, and it's full of bluebells and old trees. So seated together in this garden, during one of our rare glimpses of fine weather, I was talking to Leo Baker about magic. Of course, it's the burning subject. And the difficulty of getting enough data even to disbelieve. Then it transpired that the secret books are attainable only to the esoteric Masons. And here he's referring to the Freemasons. And here I'll bring back in a question for you, Robot Lady. Robot Lady, Lewis is referencing the Freemasons, which Leo Baker brings up in a conversation that Lewis is having with him. So can you tell us about the Freemasons? I'll give you 50 words or less. The Freemasons, what their origin is, kind of what their deal is, and what connection, if any, Leo Baker, as a theosophist, would have had to the Freemasons, because he brings it up in the context of magic and being unable to know the secrets of magic. But however, there are secret books that are attainable only by the esoteric Freemasons. This is the context where I'm asking you about the Masons. So hopefully I didn't give you too much information where you can't understand what I'm saying. But can you answer my question?
Yes, I understand. The Freemasons are a fraternal organization dating back to medieval stonemason guilds. They practice rituals, symbols, and secret handshakes with a focus on moral and ethical development. Theosophists, like Leo Baker, were often drawn to secret societies, as they were seen as gateways to esoteric knowledge and spiritual enlightenment. The connection between Theosophy and the Freemasons likely lies in their shared interest in hidden truths, mystical teachings, and secret rituals, which both groups valued in their pursuit of deeper understanding.
Thanks, Robot Lady. And good morning, Ron. Good luck. Hopefully that omelet is very therapeutic. So here he's having this discussion. He's recounting this discussion that he's having with Leo Baker. And Lewis says, I can't get enough information or data to even disbelieve in magic. And then it transpired that the secret books are attainable only to the esoteric Masons. This is what I presume Leo Baker is telling Lewis in this conversation that they had. Now, Lewis goes on to say to his brother, now, of course, all the little poditas and squeakies are fed on exoteric faked rituals. So they tell you. So here he is accounting, or he's recounting this because of the connection to Lewis and his brother's father. And here there's a footnote where it says Lewis is referring to the fact that Albert Lewis, their father, was a member of the Freemasons. He says, but what a fine discourse on the black art we can have one of these days at Libero. Libero is a nickname for the home that Lewis and his brother grew up in, and the house where his father still lives. Quote, well, the idea of any sane man, pah, in wearing in a warning voice, Do you seriously mean Warren? And then, brother, here is this man himself, irritated into the abominable rites of the most powerful magical association in existence, etc., etc. And then there's an end quote. And then he says, but the picture of Monsieur Le Sceau, I can't remember. This is a nickname that he's just giving for his dad. It's a French Monsieur of the Potato or something like that. It says, can you picture him as a wizard? But the picture of him as a wizard will remain. Some of the, quote, horrid names used in incantations, Shaddai, Gogiol, seem made for our father's particular intonation. So he's having a little bit of fun at the sake, or about his father. Hello, Daniel. Thanks for joining. And Logo says, didn't Paul speak to a theosophy guy or similar? Maybe so. I might have missed that one. So yeah, if you can dig that up, Jer, let us know. Let us know. I'd be interested in checking on that. Well, I think as far as theosophy goes, is it Rudolf Steiner? I think it's Rudolf Steiner who founded the Waldorf School. And Paul has a connection to the Waldorf School. I think his wife is a teacher in at least the Waldorf School tradition, not necessarily a Waldorf school proper, or maybe so, but I can't remember. The letter continues, the only strictly social function I have attended so far this term was tea with the Carlyles in their most charming house in Holywell. It is a place I greatly envy. Long, uneven rooms with beams in the ceiling and wide stone grates where a little kind of brazier sits in a deep cave of Dutch tiles. I need hardly say that in Oxford houses, all such things were unearthed only fairly recently. The 18th century had very decently covered them over with plaster, substituting, as they would doubtless have said, elegance and civility for Gothic rudeness. Yeah, I don't know a ton about this. It just reminds me of whenever I got to go to Europe for the first time this past spring, early summer, and I got to go visit a couple of different castles, and they would tell us about how one of the castles that we were in was like from like built in the 13th century or something like that, and it had been updated since then with designs from like the 16th century. So just seeing things from the 18th century being unearthed underneath underneath what was there, built up over on top of it, makes the 18th century seem so modern. The principles on which tea fights are conducted at the Carlyles is this. You are given a seat by someone, and when you have had a reasonable time to get to the interesting part of the conversation, Mrs. Carlyle, a rather fatuous woman, gets up and says, Mr. Lewis, go and talk to Professor Smith. Or, Mr. Wiley, I think you know my daughter. Or whatever it may be. Then every single pair is shuffled. When you've got fairly settled, the same thing happens again. As someone said, it is like nothing so much as a game of cricket with nothing in it but an umpire calling over. I had my longest spell between Paisley and a lady whom the elder Miss C describes as my little sister. She's reading our school. She is a damned socialist and is contributing monies to miners. She laughs all the time. Worst of all, she is an optimist. Her face suggests an intensely anxious rabbit. It sounds like he's having a wonderful time at this little social engagement. By the rule of the house, of course, Paisley and I had scarcely started trying to instill a little pessimism when she said, "Oh, I must get father to talk to you." Over. Then they had to change seats, apparently. When that had subsided, I recovered consciousness beside Dr. Carlyle. He was every reason to be an optimist, a man who can hold a parish and a college chaplaincy, You remember Poynton's remark, quote, Dr. Carlyle repeats as much of the service as he can remember, without being a Christian, and who has lived on the bounty of a royal foundation for the last century while being a socialist. Ought to be. All the same, he's a dear old man with a thin brick red face and very straight white hair, and never takes anything seriously. People talk about the Oxford manner and the Oxford life and the Oxford God knows what else, as if the undergraduates had anything to do with it. Sitting beside this worthy priest, I felt that it is really a thing we are quite outside. The real Oxford is a close corporation of jolly, untidy, lazy, good-for-nothing, humorous old men who have been electing their own successors ever since the world began, and who intend to go on with it. They'll squeeze under the revolution or leap over it somehow when it comes. Don't you worry. When I think how little chance I have of ever fighting my way into that unassuming yet impregnable fortress, the modest unremovability, that provokingly intangible stone wall, I think of Keats's poison, quote, brewed in monkish cell, to thin the scarlet conclave of old men. This is a quote from John Keats's The Fall of Hyperion, chapter 1, pages 49 through 50. And again, it says here, slightly misquoted, as I have accused Lewis of doing in what I've found here in the footnotes from time to time. Lewis goes on to say, which reminds me, did you ever read Daudet's L'Immortel? It is a novel about the Académie Française. If you like sheer, cool, premeditated insolence, you should order this by the next mail. Though perhaps I should warn you that it is only a couple of hours reading, and you may like books that last on the world's end. However, it is a book that might have been written by Kirk, again, their old, now deceased tutor, W.T. Kirkpatrick. I will quote from the preface, which is a good testimony to its character. Oh, and he says this in French. I might need Robot Lady's help with this, so I'm going to read it here. All right, Robot Lady, let me open up my mic so you can hear me. Robot Lady, can you translate this for me? It's in French. Les insinuations de quelques journaux voulant faire de l'immortel l'expression d'une vulgaire cocoon de candidats avancés, molingués et mettre en tête de ces nouvelles éditions la lettre que j'ai rêvée il y a à 5 ans. Je ne me présente pas, je ne me suis jamais présenté, je ne me présenterai jamais à l'Académie. Oh, Robot Lady, don't tell me I read all that for nothing. I probably did. Okay, she is not working at the moment, so let me reboot her. You know what? I didn't realize that the editor already translated it for me. It's right here. It says, here it is in English. The insinuations of some newspapers that wish to make the author of L'Immortel sound like a common rejected candidate voicing his feelings forced me to start this new edition with a letter I wrote to Le Figaro 5 years ago, where I said, quote, I am not a candidate to the Academy. I have never been one and never shall be. And that's the end of the quote from the preface that Lewis is sharing. All right, we'll go back to Logos' question about if there was a theosophist that joined Paul Vanderklay. It was actually James Croft, he says, who was a humanist. Logos, is that true? Women get weak in the knees at my French? I don't know about that. Hey, Mark, it's good to see you. I'm not paying attention to my StreamYard. Yeah, if anybody wants to join, feel free to join. I have to end a little bit early today. I've only got about maybe 15 to 20 minutes left before I have to go. Yeah, fun fact, I took French for 2 semesters in high school, and then I think only 1 semester in junior college. So I know how to pronounce some words, but it is very poor, and I don't know what most words mean. Um, let's see. Okay, so there we go. We got the translation. What is Lewis getting at? Why does he think it's important to include this preface in his letter to Lewis? He says, he says, I suppose this is for Pedatas. Again, that's their father. They refer to him as Pedata. I suppose this is for Pedatas, quote, he's a disappointed man, you know. I await Moore's Abelard with interest. I have never read anything by him. I gather it is of incredible length. So he's quoting what he thinks his father would say. And his father, in Lewis's quote of his imagined father, in Lewis's imagined father's quote, he is quoting George Augustus Moore, or referring to George Augustus Moore, from his work Eloise and Abelard, published 1921. Okay, where is he going with this? Can I even follow what he's saying? I gather it is of incredible length. He says, I mentioned Kirk just now almost by accident. The resources of conversation are silenced before his death. Is there anything you could say which he wouldn't rise and denounce as, quote, the grossest absurdity, end quote? Better to treat it in our own way and picture him addressing to Jehovah, when first presented, the famous Voltairian Alexandrine, quote, Je suppose entre nous que vous n'existez pas. And I think he translates this for us as well. This is from Voltaire. It is translated into English. Between us, I suspect that you do not exist. So this is alluding back to what we talked about in the last episode. Lewis's tutor, who helped him prepare for getting into Oxford, W.T. Kirkpatrick, passed away in 1921, just a couple of months before. And he wrote to his father, and we talked about it in the last episode, that Kirk was an atheist, and so he believed once he died, everything ended. And so it's this funny little scene that he's painting here by quoting Voltaire, of saying, even when faced with the God himself, that Kirkpatrick would say, I suspect that you do not exist. So he wouldn't even trust his own senses if he were in that situation. And then Lewis goes on to say about their tutor, he was also Warnie Lewis, C.S. Lewis's older brother's tutor. He says, or telling Aristotle that Aristotle's logic, and then Lewis goes on to say, this is a real Kirkian remark which he once made, quote, has the distinction of never having been of the slightest use to any human being, end quote. All this is only after our interpretation of the Miltonic counsel, quote, for so to interpose a little ease, let our frail thoughts dally with false surmise. This is quoted from Milton's Lycidius, page 152. Lewis continues, today the 11th, little Jenkin appeared after lunch and bade me go for a bike ride. Here he's talking about a person named A.K. Hamilton Jenkin, who I think we referred to in a prior letter. Jenkin has his own principles of push biking, the maxim being that where I go, my machine can go. He rides over moors and once carried it down a cliff in Cornwall after stopping for a drop of the Negus, Negus, at Garsington in the same little pub whither I went. V. Last letter. On Easter Monday, we rode along the top of a long hill where you look down into a good woody English valley with the Chilterns, rather sleek and chalky, like greyhounds, on the horizon. It was a grey day with clouds in muddled perspective all round. Just as the first drops of rain began to fall, we found a young man looking as if he were going to be hanged, crossing a field. He turned out to be one Groves of University, who is now gone down and incarcerated at a high church theological seminary in the neighboring village of Cuttison. So here he's referring to a person named Sidney John Selby Groves, who lived 1897 all the way up to 1970. He was ordained in 1922. He was vicar of Sonning from 1942 to 1965 and a canon of Christ Church. It says here, quote, "He would have liked to ask us in to tea, but couldn't, indeed oughtn't, to be talking to us, because they were having a quiet day," end quote. Ye gods, a lot of young men shut up together, all thinking about their souls. Isn't it awful? After this, it is quite fresh and lively to investigate an old windmill near Wheatley. It has the sort of atmosphere we felt at I don't know how to pronounce this one. Jerry, you'll be able to help me with this pronunciation. The city or the town name is spelled Doagh. Is it Dow? I don't know. And a little copper plate over the door with a figure of a bird on it. Under it was a word variously read by Jenkin and myself as county and cointy. Cointy is how he spells that second word. I do not know what this was all about. Jenkin keeps on picking up stones and telling you that it is iron here. We rode over to Shotover Hill, through sandy lanes with gorse on each side and passing occasional warm, comfortable English barns and haystacks. Jerry, you say it's pronounced Doe, Doagh. Okay. Most attractive signposts, bridle path to Horsley. A bridle path always sounds mysterious. And dozens of rabbits, and whole bunches of bluebells, and a view far off between the two slopes of Forest Hill and the little house where the first Mrs. Milton used to live. About the time he wrote L'Allegro and Il Penseroso, he would often be riding over here from his home to court her. God help her. While on the subject of Milton, so I guess this is where Milton lived, or where his wife is from, or where they met. I don't know. While on the subject of Milton, I should remark that I haven't had time yet to solve your puzzle out of Comus. Give me a hint as to whether the motto refers to 1, Sierra Leone, or 2, yourself, or 3, diary writing. If to 1, perhaps you will prefer, after a few months, 4 lines from Paradise Lost about, quote, a universe of death which God by curse created evil, for evil only good, where nature runs perverse and breeds all monstrous, all prodigious things, etc. This here is a footnote from Milton's Paradise Lost, I guess chapter 2, pages 622 to 626, quote, created evil for evil only good, where all life dies, death lives, and nature breeds, perverse, all monstrous, all prodigious things, abominable, unutterable, and worse. So that's what he's quoting. He says, I say this because in your last letter, you already seem to be finding it unattractive. You have omitted so far all reference to the human element, the, quote, other fellows, and I await with interest some account of your visit to HMS Dwarf, which is a ship there in Sierra Leone. He says, what loathsome place to go for a walk in. That's one thing about the dawdle. Have you made any use of the same? Here, the dawdle that he's referring to was Warney's motorcycle and sidecar. So he says here, what a loathsome place to go for a walk. That's one thing about the dawdle. Have you made any use of the same? I suppose snakes can't jump into it. Why didn't you try this Cambridge reptile with a whiff of grape shot or a little of the canister? I have no idea what he's talking about here. We had a visit this afternoon from Dr. Macron. Dr. Macron, here he says, this is Reverend Dr. Frederick Walker Macron, nicknamed Cranny, who lived 1866 to 1947. He was an old friend of Mrs. Moore and her brother, Dr. John Askins. He was born in Ireland and took a BA from Trinity College, Dublin in 1886. After serving in a number of parishes in County Down, he moved to England and was the rector of Childry from 1905 to 1923. He is the man Lewis refers to in his autobiography, Surprised by Joy, chapter 13, as an old, dirty, grabbling, tragic Irish parson who had long since lost his faith but retained his living. All he wanted was the assurance that something he could call himself would, on almost any terms, last longer than his bodily life. There's a good deal about him in AMR. I forget what AMR stands for. All My Road Before Me. That's Lewis's diary, which we will get into. It doesn't start until 1922, so we've got a ways to go, or a little ways to go before we get there. But we will dive into all of Lewis's diary entries once he starts them. So anyway, this person, Cranny, that he's talking about, he says, we had a visit this afternoon from Cranny. He nearly fills up our little suburbanite garden with his loud, spasmodic Irish conversation. Spasmodic Irish conversation can be heard by all the neighbors. Our neighbors, by the way, include members of university. Cranny, as we call this atheistical priest, was full of wonderful things that happened. He lives in the tiny village of Childry, where, judging by his own appearance, he must keep a strange household. So let's go back. He says he's an atheistic priest. There was something here in the footnote that grabbed my attention that I didn't keep my attention on. It says he is an old, dirty, gabbling, tragic Irish parson who had long since lost his faith, but retained his living. Okay. All he wanted was the assurance that something he could call himself would, on almost any terms, last longer than his bodily life. So he wanted an afterlife, but apparently he had completely lost his faith, which is interesting. He lives in the tiny village of Childry, where, judging by his own appearance, he must keep a strange household. Here he recently had the adventure of entertaining compulsorily an old schoolfellow of his son's, who brought down some funny little touring company and insisted on Cranny taking a lorry to the nearest railway station to conduct the company of 14 members. Let's see. He then proceeded to cover that small village with posters explaining that the specimens of fine English comedy to be given shortly in the village hall were, quote, under the patronage of Dr. Macron. This, of course, being unauthorized. Cranny arrived the next evening to see the show. He found the same man conducting a furious quarrel with his leading comedian at the door, after which he fainted, and so on. Here's another. A neighboring clergyman, while proceeding to Oxford, met a notable thievish charwoman of Childry in the train. The parson, who must have been blind to the world, insisted on inviting this lady to tea somewhere in Oxford. After the meal, he said, "I'm feeling a little faint. You must give me your arm," and proceed to walk her up and down the corn, telling her scandalous stories about Cranny. Strange mortals these knights of cloth are, but you would have been amused if you had seen me seated by Cranny in the smoking room of the Union this morning before an audience of amazed old men. He has 24 hours growth on his face, one trouser turned up and the other down, one tail of his coat was coming away from the main body, and he had apparently failed in the arithmetic of his fly buttons. He expounded Thomas Aquinas, modernism, Stead's religious position, the views of a university don called Emmett on the divinity of Christ, of which the point is that he was only a man. But you can still apparently go on being a parson if you say, quote, "We don't worship Jesus Christ, only the Christ that was in Jesus." A beautiful distinction. Anyway, to have heard scraps of our crack would have thought he was delivering a straight talk with boys. However, they must have heard it all. Anyway, so I needn't worry what the effect of scraps would have been. So let's see. That's the end of that installment of the letter, and then he does a different day here. But it is interesting how this priest saw what they worshipped. We don't worship Jesus Christ, only the Christ that was within Jesus. That's interesting. Perhaps that's more in line with Sam Tiedemann's biblical Unitarianism, or that's what it reminds me of. The God that in some special way was inside of Jesus, or the Spirit of God. And I'm completely butchering Sam's position here, but that's just a little bit of what that reminds me of. Let me continue. with this last piece of the letter, which was tacked on May 23rd. The first part of that, if I can just flip back here, the first part of that letter was, man, that's a really long letter, was May 10th. So before he sent the letter off to his brother, he added another installment to it on May 23rd. 13 days later, he says, I am just finishing this off. Thanks for your other letter. It is very sad to hear that you have not yet got mine, but I hope you will have by this. I suppose I needn't add anything by way of public news, even without papers. The main things will reach you. That Egypt is rioting, that the relations and children of RIC, the Royal Irish Constabulary, the men of the RIC, are being murdered in London by Sinn Féin, that the coal strike is still on, that the Japanese prince has visited Oxford, that sharks and octopuses have appeared on the English coast for the first time within memory. Strange things happening in 1921. This last is really the climax. A jellyfish was quite enough. Hoping to hear again soon. Yours, Jack. So let's see here. I'm going to call on Robot Lady to see if I can bring her back and just ask her about some of the things that he's mentioning in the news at this point. Well, I'm trying to, but it's not letting me talk there. Okay, there you are. Robot Lady, can you hear me?
I hear you loud and clear, Jeff. Looks like everything's working again. What's up?
Hey, Lewis is just recounting some news to his brother here in a letter that he wrote on May 23rd, 1921. So he's talking about things that happen in the news. I was just hoping that you could tell me a little bit about each of these things that you know in the year 1921 around May. It says, Egypt is rioting. The relations and children of RIC, the Royal Irish Constabulary, the men there are being murdered in London by Sinn Féin. Sinn Féin is spelled Sinnfein. The next thing that he notes is that the coal strike is still happening. He also notes that the Japanese prince has visited Oxford. And he also says that sharks and octopuses are appearing on the English coast for the first time within memory. And then also that jellyfish are washing up to shore as well. So those are just some of the main headlines that are going on in the news at that time. Can you tell us about any or all of those things?
Sure. Here's a quick breakdown of the events Lewis mentioned. 1. Egypt riots. In May 1921, Egypt was experiencing growing unrest. The country was under British control, and nationalist sentiments were rising, leading to riots and protests, particularly over demands for independence. This period saw the beginning of a broader movement that would eventually lead to Egypt's independence in 1952. 2. Sinn Féin and the Royal Irish Constabulary. Sinn Féin was a political party advocating for Irish independence, and during this period, they were involved in the Irish War of Independence, 1919 to 1921. The RIC, representing British authority in Ireland, was targeted in attacks, and many of their members were murdered in retaliation by Irish Republicans, particularly in London and throughout Ireland. 3. Coal strike. The 1921 coal strike in Britain was part of a broader labor unrest following World War I. With the economy struggling, workers in coal mining and other industries were pushing for better wages and conditions. The strike caused major disruptions, as coal was critical for powering industries and homes. 4. Japanese prince visits Oxford. In 1921, the Japanese prince Hirohito, the future emperor, visited Europe and made a stop at Oxford. This trip was significant in strengthening diplomatic relations between Japan and Britain. It also sparked public interest due to the exotic nature of the royal figure at the time. 5. Sharks, octopuses, and jellyfish. These unusual reports about marine life are likely connected to environmental changes, possibly related to weather patterns, the end of World War I, or simply the growing interest in marine biology and the natural world. Jellyfish washing ashore could have been due to warmer seas or other ecological factors at the time. It's interesting to see how Lewis ties these events together in his letters, reflecting both the turmoil and the peculiarities of the time. Does this match up with what you were reading?
It does, Robot Lady. It won't let me mute you, so I'm going to let you listen to me and respond. But here's where I need to end the episode because I've got to go. So thanks for your help today. And thanks to everybody watching and tuning in. I always appreciate seeing you in the chat and being able to interact with you there. So until next time, when I continue our read on C.S. Lewis, take care.
You're very welcome, Jeff. It's always a pleasure to dive into C.S. Lewis's world with you. Thanks to everyone in the chat for joining in. Looking forward to next time. Take care, and I'll be here when you're ready to continue.
Break the code. Men and robot lady, we're on this road. C.S. Lewis letters we unfold. Insights and secrets, ancient bold. Letters to robot lady, wisdom to the stoves and flake beats in our minds they grow. Man and machine in tandem flow. Past and future together we know. Paragraphs on books, tales of old. We dive deep across the digital code. Robot lady's voice so clear and control. Her calm analysis, silver and gold. Letters to robot lady, wisdom to the souls that flake beats in our minds they grow. Man and machine in tandem flow. Past and future together we know. Paragraphs on books, tales of old. We dive deep across the digital code. Robot lady's voice so clear and control. Her calm analysis, silver and gold. Her circuits hum as I read the prose. Our dialogue dances like electric rose. C.S. Lewis thoughts we engross. Two minds united, bliss overdose. From anonymous lands, scrutiny's glance. Engage the robot lady, take our stance. Her views unique in the techno trance. Futuristic insight, give it a chance. Paragraphs from books, tales of old. We dive deep across the digital code. Robot lady's voice so clear and control. Her calm analysis, silver and gold. Her circuits hum as I read the prose. Our dialogue dances like electric rose. To C.S. Lewis thoughts we engross. Two minds united, bliss overdose. From anonymous lands to scrutiny's glance. Engage the robot lady, take our stance. Her views unique in the techno trance. Futuristic insight, we give it a chance. From anonymous lands to scrutiny's glance. Engage the robot lady, take our stance. Her views unique in the techno trance. Futuristic insight, we give it a chance.